Hey, na 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 na. Hey, na 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 na. Hey, na 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 na. Hey, na 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 na. Ha na 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 na. Ya na 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 na. Hi na na, hey ay nay nay. Ay 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 ay. Yan nay 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 nay. Hi nay 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 nay. Hi nay 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 nay. Hi nay 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 nay. Shalom, shalom, beautiful friends. It is great to be with you. I am very sorry for the last minute change of time. I'm here at the JTS, Jewish Theological Seminary, the flagship institution of the conservative movement. If I could blur my background, you could see the beautiful JTS signs behind me. It's a remarkable institution of American Jewish life. And there was some changes in schedule. And so I'm sorry that we lost some people from learning today because of that. But I'm glad that you all were able to adapt. I'm very excited to explore this topic with you today. And when I get back, to tell you more about this Human Dignity Conference, of which I just finished a program 5 minutes ago on human dignity. Then there's a program on human rights I'm speaking on in just about 50 minutes. So we'll end probably 5 minutes early today. Okay, so today is God in Psychology. We're hardly going to scratch the surface, but I want to say one thing before we go to our text study about it, which is, how many of you, if you haven't yet read Rabbi Angela Bookdahl's book, I hope you will, because her VBM talk is coming up. And here's something she wrote on page 6. My teacher, Rabbi David Ellenson of blessed memory, would say, all theology is autobiographical. Let me repeat that because it's such an important phrase. All theology is autobiographical. I understood this to mean, writes Rabbi Bookdahl, that the formative experiences of our lives, how we have loved, suffered, healed, forgiven, will necessarily color our core beliefs about whether God is loving and just, whether human beings are fundamentally good, whether or not we have agency to change our circumstances. So I share my story not as a blueprint, but as a way of understanding how I have come to my convictions. So I love that humility, because I think what it looks like to talk about theology without humility is that we know what's true or not true based on, our intellect. Here's why there's a God. Here's why there's no God. It's clear. And what I think Rabbi Bookdahl invites us to do is to think about how our own theology has actually emerged from our early childhood, from our relationship to our parents, good or bad, from from really our life journey. That when we say I believe in God or I don't believe in God, or here's the God I believe in or don't believe in, what we're really saying is more about ourselves than what we are about any God. Okay, so before we go to the poll, let's start with a little text that I want to look at with you, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. It's from Chagiga. It's a pretty well-known text. If you ever read Milton Steinberg's book, then you, As a Driven Leaf, then great classic, then you'll remember this story. The rabbis taught in a Breita. There were 4 people who entered into a pardes. The local Scottsdale Jewish community school is called pardes, and that's because it means orchard, and it's named after this story. Or in Jerusalem, there's a Jewish learning pluralistic center called Pardes, and it's named for this story, really, for being an orchard. The are Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Acher, and Rabbi Akiva. Now, we all know Rabbi Akiva very well. He's the one who didn't know any Torah. He didn't even know the Aleph Bet when he was 40 years old, and then he came and learned later. We also might remember Ben Zoma. He's in the Haggadah. Ben Zoma's in the Haggadah of Pesach. Ben Zoma also is the famous one in Pirkei Avot who says, who is happy? Somebody who's content with their lot. Who is wise? Somebody who learns from everyone. Right? This is all Ben Zoma. Right? Acher His real name is Elisha ben Avuya, but he's called Acher because he's the first atheist in Jewish tradition. And then there's Ben Azai, who in different texts is confused with Ben Zoma. They kind of swap. So here's what it says here in the Talmud. So they both go into a mystical experience. They all go into this mystical experience, and they have different reactions. Ben Azai glanced at the divine presence, and he died, right? He couldn't handle seeing God or godliness, so he dies. Ben Zoma looks, and he becomes mentally unstable. It changes him in a way that he has lost his stability. Acher chops down the trees in the orchard, right? The rabbis are a little hostile towards Acher because he is considered to be destructive in his questioning and clarity of theology. And Rabbi Akiva comes out in peace. Okay, so you might think for a moment, which of these would be you if you were to go into some mystical experience where you thought you encountered whatever God is or whoever God is? Do you think you would simply die of shock? Do you think you would kind of be mentally transformed? Do you think you would become destructive and start destroying things? Or do you think you would leave in peace, like Rabbi Akiva? So curious to hear any thoughts on this text and what you think the rabbis are getting at here.
For me, it's about equanimity.
Great. So say a little more.
One can encounter the unknown, the unexpected, the longed for, and be at peace, not have to react, but can respond from one's soul and from one's being, rather than going off the deep end.
Great. So I think of like Christian missionaries and how they want to strike fear in you. If you don't accept Jesus Christ as your Savior, you're going to have eternal damnation, right? This feels like the opposite of a spiritual approach as to why one would want to feel warmly invited into religion, right? But for us to think about whatever it is we're longing for, because from a psychological perspective, we're all longing for something very deep, whether it's immortality, whether it's connection, whether it's knowing, right? We are longing on a very deep level to connect to this. And how does that longing actually bring out our best side rather than our worst side? How does that longing actually, as Sarah says, achieve an equanimity? There's a kind of an inner peace that comes with the search. And I think back to people in emerging adulthood, teenagers, people in their early 20s, they're almost frantically searching in a way that feels so stressful, so agitated. So I'm trying to find myself. I'm on a train in Europe, and then I'm in a Buddhist class, and then I'm showing up here and there, and I'm dating, and I'm figuring out my job, and I'm confused. Right? There's a searching. So how do we make our longing itself sweet? Okay, so let's go to the poll question before we go to God and psychology. Here comes a poll question. My belief in God. I have a deep belief in God. I go in and out of clarity on belief. I'm agnostic and full of questions and wonder. I'm very clear that there is no God. Okay, so those are very imperfect options. Yes, so if you want to make a choice there. Okay, 40% say I have a deep belief in God. 40% say I go in and out of clarity of belief. 0% say they're agnostic and full of questions and wonder. 20% say I'm very clear that there's no God. So since we have 200 people here, 20%, that's a whole 10 people. So, all right, very interesting. So we enter this conversation non-judgmentally, that wherever we fall out is beautiful and wonderful. Actually, something else that Rabbi Buchdahl writes in her book, she contrasts emunah and bitachon, faith and trust. Emunah, faith is a noun, and trust is a verb. And when Abraham says, what, I'm going to have kids? I'm going to have a whole lineage after me? God doesn't say believe. God says do something, right? Count the stars. And so I think Judaism has a very active understanding of what trust is. It doesn't just mean, it feels like a very Christian idea to say, do you believe in God? Right? As I just intellectually believe, right? Rather say, am I committed to doing acts that build trust and connection in the ultimate goodness and possibility. Okay, friends, today we're going to talk about God and human spirituality. Actually, I have a very short presentation, very short, so I look forward to hearing from you. We're going to talk about God and human spirituality within the tradition of psychology, how the field has understood belief in God as a phenomenon of the human mind. I don't want to lose what Steve was going to say that he now wrote, since he couldn't speak it. Now that I don't believe in a personal God, I feel greater peace than when the fearsome image of God was sold to us in Hebrew school. Okay, great. So I think that touches on exactly what we're talking about, that how some of these early childhood experiences may have pushed us in new directions, and some later life experiences might have moved us in new directions. Yes, it's intellectual, but it's also about our life journey. So thank you, Steve. I feel I need to start today with Sigmund Freud. How could we not start with Freud if we're going to have this conversation? A seminal figure in the field of psychology and a person with a complicated relationship to religion, and in particular with Judaism, of course, as a Jew. On the one hand, he describes his Jewishness as an essential part of his identity and his work. Right? He knows he can't throw it off in that era, especially. On the other hand, he also describes himself as estranged from it. I can give you the sources for all this. In her book, The Slayers of Moses, scholar Susan Handelman argues that Freud's psychoanalysis is best understood as flowing directly from the rabbinic interpretive tradition and mode of thought. And broadly read, Jewish writers such as Dr. Aviva Gottlieb Zernberg and Rabbi Jonathan Sachs have made sure Freud's thought has continued to feed back into the Jewish intellectual tradition. What are Freud's views of God? Well, himself an atheist, Freud wrote dismissively of religion and of the belief in God. Here's what he explains. What the common man understands by his religion, with the system of doctrines and promises, which on the one hand explains to him the riddles of this world with an enviable completeness, and on other assures him that a careful providence will watch over his life and will compensate him in a future existence for any frustrations he suffers here. The common man cannot imagine this providence than in the figure of an enormously exalted Father. Only such a being can understand the needs of the children of men and be softened by their prayers and placated by the signs of their remorse. The whole thing is so patently infantile, so foreign to reality, that to anyone with a friendly attitude to humanity, it is painful to think that the great majority of mortals will never be able to rise above this view of life. Right? So for Freud, it is tragic that humans tend to think of God as a father, tend to think of God and religion as favorable. He wants to find the goodness in human beings, but instead he is left with despair that humans believe such silly ideas about God in control of the world, caring for us. The existence of God is, in Freud's eyes, the expression of what people wish were true. It's just wish. It's fantasy, divorced from reality, and thus pathetic and unfortunate. He pathologizes people's particular image of God as a projection of their own father, an unhealthy manifestation of the Oedipal relationships, right? The Oedipus complex. He explains that religion perhaps played a historical role for humanity, but like a child growing up, he hopes human civilization will leave that infantile, neurotic illusion behind, taking up the maturity of reason instead. We should be reasonable, not religious. We should be atheists, not believers. We should grow up. Researchers since Freud, while still treating God as a human construct, have often moved away from Freud's revulsion towards the belief both in considering human society and in individual human psychology. They have also attempted to offer alternative explanations for its emergence among people. Argentinian psychoanalysis, Dr. Ana Maria Risotto, in her 1979 monograph, The Birth of the Living God, complicates Freud's understanding of the God image as purely a substitute for the Father. She writes, my study and present knowledge of the complexities of object representations makes it impossible to accept that the paternal imago only is used to form the representations of God. The components of my patient's God representations came from varied sources, and although in most patients one source prevailed, no patient formed his God representation from only one paternal imago. Moreover, not only the parent of real life, but the wished-for parent and the feared parent of the imagination appear on equal footing as contributors to the image of God. This is because object representations are not entities in the mind. They originate in creative processes involving memory and the entirety of psychic life. So she says Freud was wrong that everything that people think about God as children is based upon their fathers. It's possible it could be that way, right? But people have mothers, or many people have mothers, and people have other relationships. And people don't just have strict fathers. Some people have sweet, compassionate fathers. And people don't just have sweet mothers who bake cookies. Some people have strict or mean mothers, right? There's all types of parents and influences and all types of God relationships. Yes, psychoanalytically based upon those relationships, but it's oversimplified to embrace the Oedipus complex. And beyond adding complexity to Freud's understanding of the source of the personal God image through her case studies of her patients, Risotto also rejects his judgment of the belief in God as fundamentally a problem to be eschewed or left behind. Towards the end of her book, she writes, I have arrived at the point where my departure from Freud is inevitable. Freud considers God and religion a wishful, childish illusion. He wrote a book asking mankind to renounce it, admonishing, men cannot remain children forever. They must, in the end, go out into hostile life. We may call this education to reality. The sole purpose of my book is to point out the necessity for this forward step. Risotto responds, I must disagree. Reality and illusion are not contradictory terms. Psychic reality, whose depth Freud so brilliantly unveiled, cannot occur without that specifically human transitional space for play and illusion. To ask a man to renounce a God he believes in may be as cruel and as meaningless as wrenching a child from his teddy bear so that he can grow up. We know nowadays that teddy bears are not toys for spoiled children, but part of the illusory substance of growing up. Each developmental stage has transitional objects appropriate for the age and level of maturity of the individual. After the Oedipal resolution, God is a potentially suitable object, and if updated during each crisis of development, may remain so through maturity and the rest of life. Asking a mature, functioning individual to renounce his God would be like asking Freud to renounce his own creation, psychoanalysis, and the illusory promise of what scientific knowledge can do. This is in fact the point. Men cannot be men without illusions. The type of illusion we select, science, religion, something else, reveals our personal history and the transitional space each of us has created between his objects and himself to find a resting place to live in. So she says, embrace a little bit of compassion, that people have needs. People have needs for comfort and structure and for connection, and people will find that in different ways. Someone might play a sport with a group. Someone might play cards with a group. Someone might pray with a group. Right? We're going to do all different kinds of things based upon our different human needs. It would seem cruel to try to strip someone of their quote-unquote illusions that they have come to need. Illusions, by the way, doesn't mean they're untrue. It just means they're unprovable. It just means they're part of fantasies we live with. They may end up very well being true, but they are nonetheless our own illusions that we rely upon. One might say that love is an illusion. You can't prove that love, but we live with an illusion that gives us incredible meaning in our life. Risotto has a more nuanced, postmodern attitude towards the nature of truth, asserting that all beliefs are mental models or illusions that we construct to understand the world. It doesn't mean that they are all equal. She's still a psychoanalyst interested in helping people get away from unhealthy patterns of thought. But she does not see the absolute superiority for all minds of what Freud considers scientific reasoning. She accepts Freud's analogy between childhood behaviors and a belief in God, but she depathologizes, okay, you know the word I'm trying to say, depathologizes childhood and also depathologizes religion. Other researchers have explored the emergence of religion from an evolutionary perspective. How has it become such a pervasive trait of humanity? She asks. Much of this work has posited that religion was successful in either biological or cultural evolution because it promoted cooperative, altruistic behavior across larger populations. Some in particular have posited that a belief in a God that metes out justice allows for society to reduce the amount of human-enforced punishment, right? We can be less strict as a society because God will be strict, right? Some people will argue the opposite. We should be stricter with justice because God is compassionate. Researchers Kristen Lauren, Azim Sharif, Joseph Henrich, and Aaron Kay explain the sanctioning of norm transgressors is a necessary, though often costly, task for maintaining a well-functioning society. Evolutionary approaches to religion suggest that beliefs in powerful, moralizing gods who can distribute rewards and punishments emerge as a way to augment earthly punishment in large societies that could not effectively monitor norm violations. So let's say something about the death penalty for a moment. A conservative who is a religious person, might say, I am executing the death penalty as a religious person to save the soul of the person, right? By giving them a punishment in this world of their life, God will not have to punish them in the next world, and they will have received their punishment in this world, suffering in this world, and so they will be liberated in the next world. A liberal person who is a religious person might say, God is all compassionate and God is the only true judge. And so we cannot be the true judges, and we should act compassionately like a compassionate God and not kill in the name of God. And so theology becomes embedded in the moral coding of our societies in various ways. In fact, one's politics and their religious denomination are almost are generally predictable by and large. People who typically show up at a Reformed synagogue tend to be progressive and liberal. People who typically show up at an Orthodox synagogue tend to be more conservative. And if you look at other denominations within Islam and Christianity and the like, it's also relatively predictive as well. Within rabbinic law, some of the most severe punishments for the most serious offenses are, quote, in the hands of heaven, and not the earthly court. For example, something called karet. Karet means having your soul cut off from the community. And mita biyadei shemayim, death penalty that is not performed by a human executioner, but expected from God. Now, another approach to understanding the emergence of religious beliefs, championed by Jewish Canadian-American psychologist Paul Bloom, says that religious beliefs in general, i.e. belief in the supernatural, are a natural result of human cognition. And they arise as a side effect of other evolved features of our cognitive processes. He points to evidence that the human brain has two separate inborn cognitive mechanisms of pattern recognition, one for recognizing physical reality, for example, gravity, and one for recognizing social reality, for example, emotional expressions on faces. Bloom argues that the dualistic belief in bodies and souls, or minds, as separate entities naturally follows from these brain mechanisms. This separation of the mind or soul from the body, which we might argue scientifically is a mistaken one, creates this space for spiritual entities, without bodies, including all manner of supernatural beliefs, such as a non-corporeal God. Bloom further points to our inborn tendency to attribute volition to complex patterns as a reason that we naturally look at the world and believe that it was created with intention by a creator. Bloom does not see an evolutionary advantage for religious beliefs themselves. Instead, he sees those beliefs as natural results of a more cognitive functions that do have evolutionary advantages. On a more clinical side, in my opinion, it's important for both religious leaders and therapists to be attentive to the ways religion and spirituality impact our mental health and our moral development, both beneficially and detrimentally. To conclude, at its best, religion can promote optimism, community, healthy daily rhythms, humility, and care for the other. At its worst, religion can increase guilt, shame, anxiety, tribalism, abdication of responsibility, obsessivity, and a sense of superiority. As Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi teaches in the Talmud, if you merit it, the Torah becomes for you a potion of life. And if you don't merit it, it becomes for you a potion of death. Rava says it differently. Quote, if you are skillful, it is a potion of life. If you are not skillful, it is a potion of death. May whatever form of Judaism we embrace be a potion of life. Okay, friends, I'm gonna stop there. We have a nice intimate group here.
I can buy what he's selling. That this actually happens. That it's a sounds almost normative part of growth, and if that were true, then why are we so widely separated in our belief in God, whatever that is?
I'm glad we're talking about evolution for a moment, because there's a phrase, tell me if you've heard this phrase before, especially with the two doctors in the room. The phrase ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, right? That's a famous phrase. It's now a largely discredited theory, I mean, almost entirely, but essentially what it means, the ontogeny, an individual's development repeats the evolutionary stages of its ancestors, phylogeny, right? But what the idea was that the evolution of a human individual, the development of human individual, you can see in that development all of human evolution that occurred, and even things like gill slits and a tail in fetal early development and things like that. So I'm curious if other doctors have thoughts on that. But I'm thinking a little bit about how does, to some degree, this idea of all of human evolution relate to our own childhood maturation as people on a developmental level, right? As some have argued, I know Jonathan Sachs did, and others here argued, Freud argued that just as humanity matured away from God, so too a child will mature away from God. And I wonder what your read of evolution is, right? Different from Bloom, or different from Freud, or different from ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, right? That in a sense of is some kind of belief hardwired into us? Is that just a social construct that comes to be embraced? Yeah, Sarah, you're still unmuted. Why don't you go?
Well, I love it because as I look at my journey, it's teshuvah. So, there I was and felt very religious, and then I went on my journey, just like Odysseus, and went searching, and thought that my answer was in meditating and in that openness, but in that open space that I found through very ardent meditation, it was my connection to everything. And that took me back, that full circle, to my early experience of God and whatever that is, and just a faith in the connectedness that I feel through this thing that I can't define, and that I have come to really embrace. I guess part of it was also that my departure was not believing in the God that I saw in the prayer book, who was this powerful male figure that I had to praise and delight in, and was going to make all the determinations of everything, would open the book and then the book would be closed. So in its own way, it is evolutionary in my being. And I think that either the fundamentalists may have that molded into their being and stay within that mold, or else we go on our journey and find our way to whatever we ultimately believe and can trust in and read. And for me, it's about resting in that place rather than clinging or craving something.
Great. Okay, love that. Just before we go to Gary, I think that part of the question of God can be viewed through the realm of truth, right? Is it true? But there's another way to access that, and that is through a different channel. One of, I'm not sure what word you would use there, Sarah. Peace, or what was it? You're on mute still.
I would say trust.
Trust, right.
Just resting in that place and trust that I'm part of this greater whole that I can't begin to explain, that I love as shards, as whatever. And certainly the mystics have given me lots of opportunity to find lots of ways of explaining it. But for me, it's just a place to rest.
Yeah, I love that. So for me, my trust is that I am, as Steve would say, very bullish. I am optimistic and full of hope, even with lots of problems in the world. And I largely view the world as good, right? I largely view not just the world, the cosmos as good. I view the cosmos as beautiful. I view the universe as something that's holding us compassionately. I view it as good, and that leads my trust towards there being an ultimate goodness, whatever that is. And so it's not that I can prove that through a realm of truth. It's that I have this trust of the goodness that doesn't dismiss all the evil and problems and pain and suffering, but tries to see around it and beyond it and within it some of that core goodness that's still there. So, yes, Sarah, thank you for that. Gary, hi, Gary.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you're well in New York. I found it interesting, Freud and his analogy with a teddy bear. And I find it interesting with, I forgot what her name from Argentina, or the other philosopher or psychologist you quoted from, that they're really not all that far apart. I think that that we do have things that we are comforted by, and as we grow older and mature, we keep looking for, be it teddy bears or God or something that make us feel comfortable. What I found interesting with that analogy is that as we have evolved, we still are looking for something for comfort, and that some people find that comfort in a very stringent God, as we see in Orthodox Judaism and in evangelicalism and in other religions around the world that have found their teddy bear and don't question. And then on the flip side, they found it someplace else. People have found that someplace else. And today I find it interesting that right-sided conservative religions are the fastest growing religions on one side, be it Orthodoxy is one of the fastest growing side of Judaism, are people finding their teddy bear in this strict way of life and without necessarily questioning. And then the flip side, ultra-conservative, liberalism, and the lack of belief in a God or religion, and have gone off the rails to all kinds of, be it drugs, alcohol, sexual addiction, computer addiction, on and on and on. So I find kind of kind of this ontogeny recapitulates biology. I'm not a psychologist and I'm not a philosopher, but I find that so much of what we do in life continues to repeat itself, and that search for something, be it right or left. That was my comments.
Yes, I appreciate that. And the repeating itself, it does feel like at times I'm not clear if we're going forward or backwards as a society, and in all different directions. And part of what humbles me is that, if you get your grandmother or grandfather's recipe for some kugel or matzo ball soup or whatever it is, if you change one ingredient, you might change the whole stew, right? You might. And what I don't know is, if we change one ingredient in society, we might change the whole thing that led to an ascent. So that humbles me to think about where bad religion has and has always been harmful, and where the good religion is hidden within some of the unhealthy parts. Because once we strip purity away, we see that sometimes we have to get a little dirty in order to get to the light. And I think with whatever religious approach we embrace, right, there's going to be some negative along with the positive that kind of comes along with it. For example, if you're in a fundamentalist camp, there's some really dangers to fundamentalism. But there's also some really positive things that come to being in a fundamentalist space in terms of connection and community and being taken care of. When you go to liberal religion, there's some real positives to that intellectually honest approach and moving away from fundamentalism. And there's some real losses that occur from leaving tradition into more progressive religious spaces. And so I think the world is trying to figure this out right now. America with Christian nationalism, Islamic fundamentalism, Israel with settlers and the rapid growth of the Haredi ultra-Orthodox population, and the assimilation of Jews in America on the other end. And so I think this is a real moment for us to not just ask the question of, like, is God true or not, but how has belief served us, and how might positive belief serve us in some way beyond a teddy bear. I wish I could hear you right now, Steve, because I feel your mind brewing, and I wish we could hear. Maybe in the future you'll call me on. Yeah, he can write in the chat. Oh, he wrote over there. Good. Yeah. Rambling thoughts. I'm less concerned about how a personal God might deal with me than how people might relate to me. Question: do believers in a personal God experience joy and happiness from the relationship, or the lack of misery and sadness? For me, it's joy and trust from other people, along with a shroud of managed expectations. Thank you, Steve, for that. And that's a question for folks here, if anybody wants to engage in that. That question.
I'm happy to engage with it. It's kind of like I do heat bodhidut. God, when it comes, first of all, I attend services online with Central. And so when I get to the silent meditation, I'm sitting here and I'm talking to God, and we're walking around my house and having that lovely chat together. And I talk about, what I'm struggling with in terms of, usually it's about which of my midah are troubling me at the moment. What do I need? And it's like, can you help me out here? And do I just need to trust more? Do I just hand it over to you? No, I'm supposed to be a partner here. We are partners in this. And so I frequently turn to my partner and say, show me what I'm supposed to do next. Because I am just at my wit's end with this person, this situation, whatever it is. But for me, Steve, it is a personal relationship. And I think God and I are in it together. So there you go. That's my perspective.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. So next week we're going to be off. There's a conflict in the schedule. But the following week we're going to go to Noam Chomsky on language. Noam Chomsky on language, which will be a very different approach from what we've been discussing here today. But it is similar to the evolutionary conversation of what is innate, what is nature versus nurture, and where does language come from? Do the mental structures of language already exist within us or not, and to what degree? And how do we communicate? And so I really appreciate everyone participating in this conversation here around God and psychology. I hope it's something we can continue to think about and start conversations rather than just the question, do you believe or not? The question of like, what in your life journey has informed how you relate to this whole idea? Positive things, negative things, and where might there still be more wonder or curiosity, based upon that introspection. So I look forward to telling you more about this Human Dignity Conference when I'm back tomorrow morning. And I hope everybody has a beautiful day. And I'm sorry again for the time change last minute. It was out of my hands, but I appreciate you still generously joining us.
Have a great time. And
thank you so much.
Let me know if you're an optimist or if you have hope or optimism, because I'm thinking Jonathan Sachs and how he defines them as separate and different.
Yes. Thank you. I appreciate his distinction there. Yes. Okay. Have a great day. See you soon.